The fork hit the plates, oh hard it cracked. Not the plate, the silence. Margaret hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. But everyone at that table knew something had just broken that couldn't be fixed with an apology. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Diane had spent 3 days preparing for this dinner. Her brother's family was visiting from Connecticut, first time in 2 years. She'd wanted everything perfect. The roast, the table settings, the warm, elegant home she'd worked so hard to build. And Margaret had been flawless, as always, moving quietly through the rooms, refilling water glasses, clearing plates with the kind of grace that made you forget someone was even working. But then Claire, Diane's 17-year-old niece, said it, and the air in that dining room turned to ice. This is a golden heart story for anyone who's ever watched cruelty happen in real time and wondered if kindness could survive it. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed someone being humiliated and regretted not speaking up sooner? Now let's go back to the moment before everything shattered. Margaret had worked for Diane Collier for 11 years. She arrived every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. She never asked for raises, never complained, never spoke unless spoken to. She cleaned with the kind of thoroughness that came from dignity, not desperation. Diane didn't know much about her. She knew Margaret lived somewhere in West Baltimore. She knew Margaret's hands were always dry, no matter the season. She knew Margaret hummed old hymns when she thought no one was listening. But she didn't know Margaret's last name. She didn't know if Margaret had children, or where she went on the day she wasn't cleaning Diane's 5-bedroom house in Roland Park. It had never seemed necessary to. Diane Collier, on the other hand, was known. Known at the country club, known at her son's private school fundraisers, known for her tasteful holiday parties and her perfectly pruned rose garden. She'd worked hard for this life. Her late husband had left her comfortable. Yes, but she'd built the rest herself. The interior design consulting business, the reputation, the respect. And she'd raised her son, Jeremy, to be kind, thoughtful, grateful. But her brother's daughter? Claire was something else entirely. 17, beautiful, bored. She'd grown up in a world where everything arrived on demand: dubaress, grades, compliments, forgiveness. She had her mother's sharp cheekbones and her father's casual cruelty, and she had no idea what it meant to need anything. It started small. Claire had been scrolling on her phone throughout most of dinner, barely looking up. Her parents, Diane's brother Tom and his wife Vanessa, didn't say a word. They never did. Margaret entered quietly, carrying a tray to clear the salad plates. Claire glanced up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice light and sweet. "Could you bring me some more sparkling water? The kind with the lime, not the lemon." Margaret nodded. "Of course." She returned a moment later with a fresh glass. Claire took a sip, paused, then wrinkled her nose. "This is lemon." Margaret's face didn't change. "I'm sorry. I'll bring the lime." "It's fine," Claire said, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm sure you're doing your best." There was a flicker, just a flicker, in Margaret's eyes. But she said nothing. Diane saw it, felt the discomfort crawl up her spine, but she stayed quiet. Jeremy, her son, was watching too, his jaw tight. Tom laughed awkwardly. "Claire, come on." "What?" Claire looked around innocently. "I said it's fine." Vanessa sipped her wine and said nothing. Margaret left the room, and that should have been the end of it. But 20 minutes later, Margaret returned to clear the dinner plates. And Claire, emboldened by her parents' silence, looked up at her and smiled. "So, Margaret," she said brightly, "do you have kids?" Margaret hesitated. "Yes, 2. "Oh, that's nice. Are they in college?" "My son is." "Where?" Margaret's hands tightened slightly on the edge of the plate. "Morgan State." "Oh," Claire's smile didn't falter. "That's a nice." I'm applying to Yale." The comparison hung in the air like smoke. Tom cleared his throat. Vanessa checked her phone. Diane felt her stomach twist, but still, she said nothing. Margaret turned to leave. And then Claire said it. "It must be hard, watching people like us live like this while you, well, clean up after us." The fork hit the plate. Margaret set the stack down carefully on the sideboard. She turned. And when she spoke, her voice was quiet, steady, cold. "You have no idea what I've lived through, young lady, and I hope to God you never do." Then she walked out. Not to the kitchen. Out the front door. The sound of it closing was soft, but it echoed. Diane found her sitting on the front steps. Margaret's hands were folded in her lap. Her shoulders were still, but her eyes were wet. Diane stood there for a long moment, unsure what to say. Finally, she sat down beside her. "I'm sorry," Diane said quietly. Margaret didn't look at her. "You didn't say it." "No, but I didn't stop it either." Silence. Then Margaret spoke. "My daughter died 3 years ago." Diane's breath caught. She was 22. She was studying nursing. She got caught in a crossfire walking home from her shift at the hospital. Diane felt her throat close. "My son, he's at Morgan State on a full ride. He's studying engineering. He's brilliant. And he works 2 jobs to help me keep the lights on because I can't alone anymore." Margaret finally looked at her. "I don't clean your house because I failed at life, Mrs. Collier. I clean your house because I'm surviving it." Diane's hands were shaking. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You never—" Diane went back inside. Claire was laughing at something on her phone. Tom and Vanessa were discussing their upcoming trip to Napa. Jeremy was staring at his plate, his face tight with anger. Diane stood at the head of the table. And for the first time in years, she raised her voice. "Get out." Everyone looked up. "What?" Tom blinked. "I want you out of my house. Now." Vanessa's mouth fell open. "Diane, what are you? Your daughter just humiliated a woman who has survived more pain in 3 years than Claire will experience in her entire spoiled, shallow life. And you sat there. You said nothing." Tom stood. "You're overreacting. Margaret's daughter was murdered," Diane said, her voice breaking. "And tonight, your daughter mocked her for being poor." The room went still. Claire's face went pale. "I didn't know." "Because you didn't care," Jeremy said quietly. "You didn't see her as a person. You saw her as furniture." Tears welled in Claire's eyes. But this time, they didn't look performative. They looked real. Vanessa grabbed her purse. "We're leaving." "Good," Diane said. Tom looked at her, something flickering in his face, shame maybe, or recognition. But he didn't apologize. He just left. Margaret didn't come back the next week. Or the week after. Diane called, left voicemails, texted. Nothing. Jeremy suggested they go to her neighborhood, find her. But Diane was afraid. Afraid Margaret didn't want to be found. Afraid she'd lost something she hadn't even known mattered. And then, 3 weeks later, the doorbell rang. Diane opened it. Margaret stood there, her hands folded in front of her. "I came to tell you I quit," she said. Diane's heart sank. "But I also came to tell you something else." Margaret's eyes softened. "You could have stayed silent, like you always did, but you didn't. And that mattered. If this story reminds you of someone who stood up when it mattered or someone you wish had shared it with them." Margaret didn't quit. But things changed. Diane asked her to sit, to have coffee. She learned Margaret's last name, Turner. She learned about her son, Marcus, who was graduating in the spring. She learned about Margaret's late daughter, Simone, who had dreamed of opening a clinic in underserved neighborhoods. And Diane made a decision. She started a small scholarship fund in Simone's name for nursing students at Morgan State. Margaret cried when she found out, not because it brought Simone back, but because someone had finally seen her daughter. Jeremy helped Margaret's son, Marcus, get an internship at an engineering firm. And Claire? Claire wrote Margaret a letter. It took her for tries, but when she finally sent it, it was honest, raw, and apologetic. Margaret didn't respond right away, but 3 months later she did. One line: "I forgive you. Now do better. Thank you for spending this time with Golden Heart Stories." If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. And tell me in the comments, what part of this story stayed with you the most?